Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy, and today it's a football week. Monday, the NFL is back, the fall is here, September is here, and it is time to get you ready for week one of the season. I've got my running back rankings, my start and sit players for this week. We got the top 30 at the running back position. I'll run through all 30 of them, give you a little piece of advice and my thoughts on why I have them ranked where I do, and a couple of players that missed out and why they did miss out. But before we get into it, if you guys do want to ask specific questions for your team all season long, I'll be able to do that for you. What we'll be doing every Friday at 4 Eastern time, the entire season, we're going to have a live room on the STUNT. If you guys haven't checked out the STUNT, it is a sports social betting app. So we've got takes posts, sparks posts. I'm posting video content on there. I'm posting written posts with any of fantasy advice and questions you might have. Any NFL insight you're looking for, we posting there. Anything you're looking for, sports specific, if you're looking to collect and get social media content that's completely tailored to your favorite sports, that's where it happens, on the STUNT. The link to download the app is down below on both Android and for iOS. And you want to be there and following OwnersBox because, again, 4 p.m. Eastern, every single week this season, we will be answering your questions on who you should start, who you should sit there. So make sure you're downloading the STUNT and joining us every single Friday. Let's get into the top 30 at the running back position for week one. Let's start with my number one player, and it might not be the player you might expect, but it is Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. And I think this comes down to what I see from this Cowboys team is, hey, we want to take care of the ball more. We don't want to see Dak leading the league in interceptions again. We don't really have a replacement for Ezekiel Elliott. Deuce Vaughn is not going to take touchdown opportunities away from Tony Pollard, and we have an advantageous matchup here. I'm going to be going off of some of the stats from last season. I might give some insight as to whether or not I think those rankings might change for these teams. I'm a little bit lower on the Giants than most people are this season. Last year, they were 24th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They were 29th in rushing EPA. So this was a team that struggled against the run. Pollard's going to get those opportunities. He's going to get those touchdowns as well. And I like him a lot in week one of the season. So for my RB2, the guy you probably expected to be RB1 is Christian McCaffrey. He's got a matchup with the Steelers. The Steelers are a bit more of a middling to solid run defense. They were 10th in EPA per attempt last season, 15th in fantasy points per game. You know, you're getting that solid trio of TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, and Highsmith. Sorry, is it Highsmith? Yeah. So you have a solid front seven, I think, in my mind for this team. Still expect McCaffrey to get his volume, get his opportunities, contribute in the rushing game and in the receiving game and be able to have that high floor as well. My RB3 is Bijan Robinson. I am expecting Bijan to be a guy that I can count on right off the hop. Carolina was a pretty middling defense, 18th in fantasy points per game last season, 12th in rushing EPA, so pretty decent against the run, but I expect the Falcons to win this game, and I expect Bijan to be on the field quite a bit. Like, this isn't a rookie that's going to be eased into the offense. He's going to be set up right away. At 4 is Nick Chubb, a matchup with the Bengals, who are pretty good in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but actually kind of struggled against the run. 19th in run defense grade from PFF and 21st in EPA. And they do lose some pieces in the linebacker spot and did lose some pieces at the middle of their defense as well, or the middle of their defensive line. So I do have a little bit of concerns about this defense, and I think the Browns are going to win this game. I like the Browns in this one. We'll have some betting picks later this week too, and I think they're going to be on there for me. At 5 is Joe Mixon. Everybody knows about the Cleveland Browns' struggles as a run defense last year. Puts Mixon in a really good spot against them. 28th in fantasy points allowed the Browns were last year, 29th in run defense grade, so wasn't great. And I do expect Mixon, in the early parts of the season to have a pretty heavy workload or share of the running back opportunities, just as they still try to figure out who they want to see as the RB2 and change of pace guy. At 6 is Josh Jacobs. Jacobs coming off a huge season last year. I expect him to still be the focal point of this offense. And when you run into a pass defense as good as the Broncos, I think he'll be heavily utilized. 22nd in fantasy points per game allowed were the Broncos, so in the bottom third of the league or so, but a million defense and overall against the run, 15th in rushing EPA, so not a terrible defense, but do lose, a Bradley Chubb as well, and I'm not sure I love as much of the replacements in the middle of that defense too. At 7, Austin Eckler, one you might be surprised I haven't mentioned yet. Eckler's got the Miami defense, and Miami's been pretty good against the run for years now. They're 12th in fantasy points allowed, 5th in run defense grade from PFF, so it's a good group, and I do expect Eckler's receiving volume to come down. So if they run into some matchups where the run defense isn't quite as good, I still do really like him because I think the Chargers will run the ball better this year. But when I run into this type of matchup with the Dolphins, where the advantage for this offense is definitely attacking the secondary without Jalen Ramsey, I'm going to go lean a little bit more towards their passing attack than their rushing attack. At 8 is Derrick Henry. He's got the New Orleans Saints, a defense that I think is becoming less and less respectable against the run. They used to be a really elite unit against it. Now they're 20th in EPA per rush from opponents. They were though 13th in fantasy points a game allowed to running backs, so a solid group nonetheless. But I do expect Henry to be a focal point of this offense, as they probably struggle to be able to drop back with this offensive line. Henry's a guy that will live off of opportunities, less so efficiency this season. At 9 is Saquon Barkley, a matchup with the Dallas Cowboys, who were a really good run defense last year, 9th in EPA per rush, 4th in fantasy points a game allowed to running backs. They didn't give up a lot of receptions either in this scheme. Dan Quinn is back, so I don't expect that to change. And this is a Cowboys team, again, that I think the Giants will struggle against, and you'll have to see them moving the ball through the air if they're playing from behind, and that leans more towards Darren Waller in my mind. At 10 is Aaron Jones, a really advantageous matchup for Jones, so I'm very high on him this week. He's got a Chicago defense that was 31st in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs, second last in the league, 32nd in run defense grade, dead last in the league, and 26th in EPA. So definitely one that you got to be playing Jones this week, no question about it. 12, a player I haven't been high on in the pre-draft process, but I mean, there's no other time to be starting J.K. Dobbins than in this matchup against the Houston Texans, who are dead last in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs, and 31st run defense grade, and 23rd in EPA. So, I mean, if you're not playing J.K. Dobbins, you might as well not have him on your team. If I had him, I'd be playing him this week and have some good expectations for him too. Now we flip over to my RB2s this week. Starts with Travis Etienne. Got a matchup with the Colts. The Colts are pretty good run defense. Like this team's no slouch against the run. I just don't know how good they'll be, so I still respect Etienne to take Bigsby as a rookie. Doesn't have, I think, quite the same size role he might have in week 10 that he does right now. 23rd in fantasy points allowed, the Colts were, but they were 4th in EPA and a top 12 run defense by run defense grade from PFF. So a pretty good unit. It'll just be, is this a team that'll be in a lot of running game scripts? Will the Jaguars be as a team that's definitely, I think, a better team than what the Colts are? 14, player I also haven't been high on in the pre-draft process, but doesn't mean he's not a good start this week, and he'll be someone I'll definitely be targeting on Thursday night when I'm betting on this game, is Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So the Kansas City was pretty good against running backs. 11th in fantasy points allowed, on the other side, like 19th in EPA, so not great there, but they were the worst team by a country mile in receptions allowed to running backs. So if Gibbs is playing out of the backfield, he's definitely going to pick up some receptions. That is where I'm looking for him. If you're in a PPR league, he's probably going to have a really good week. Even in half PPR, he'll definitely have a solid week too. At 15, Madre Stevenson got the Eagles. The Eagles were a team that really struggled against the run, 31st in EPA per rush, and then they were 14th in fantasy points a game allowed to running backs. So even though they were a team that were in a lot of leads and running backs weren't getting the ball as much, they were really bad against the run. We'll see if that improves with, Jalen Carter being added in the draft to fill up the middle of the field as well. We'll see if they improve. I think they do, so that's why I'm a little bit lower on Ramondre this week, as the Patriots are in a game where it's going to be tough to be able to win, and then we'll see how much Stevenson plays a role in the passing game. That's really where I think his floor is saved here. At 16, Alexander Mattison. Tampa Bay is a team that most people fear from a running back position, but I think this is a team that doesn't have nearly the same talent. When you look at the guys in the front four, they still have Vita Vea, who'll definitely be able to stuff the run, but Madison's role is going to be all-encompassing. He's going to have a huge opportunity share for this offense. The Bucs, though, 7th in fantasy points per game allowed. So running backs, 8th in EPA. So it's still going to be, I think, tough sledding of sorts for Madison, but the volume will definitely make him a guy that I got to play this week. There's other guys I have more questions about their role. I don't have any question about what Madison's role is and his volume. 18 is Khalil Herbert. The Packers are a team that you definitely want to target for running backs this year. I don't expect that to really change. Their personnel didn't change much. 25th in fantasy points a game allowed to running backs last year. 28th in EPA too. So one that you can certainly take advantage of there. At 19, Cam Akers. Well, he's in a great matchup. My question here is and it will be every week. I got to learn from this. Maybe he could have been more ahead because of the matchup, but the Rams might be so bad that they just can't run the ball all that much. And then they have, Matthew Stafford. Hopefully Cooper Kupp is healthy for week 1. If they have those two guys, they'll lean on them more than they did with Akers at the tail end of the season. But the matchup's good. 29th in fantasy points per game allowed were the Seahawks last year. They let a few pieces go, so I just don't think they're going to improve that much. They made a couple of changes. I don't know if it's going to be enough. 25th in EPA. So again, this is a group that struggled last year. I'm going off of a lot of this kind of stuff, plus what I see the running back roles being. That's why I've got Akers here. 20 is Miles Sanders. Again, that matchup with Atlanta. This could be a divisional game that does ultimately end up pretty close as well. But Sanders, like with how the room looks at receiver with some guys banged up, he's going to play a receiving role for this team for sure. And the Atlanta was 27th in EPA allowed per EPA per rushing attempt last season. They did struggle against the run last year. They revamped their front four quite a bit, so that could definitely help them. 19th in fantasy points per game allowed, so weren't terrible against running back, so Miles Sanders is still a decent option. Guy that's moved very far down in my rankings for this week is obviously Najee Harris. I mean, he's definitely someone that I have my rankings, but there are also times when I look at my roster and I'm like, okay, do I want floor or do I want upside? And Harris is a guy I'd play because of floor, but San Francisco's first in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year, the number one defense in EPA per rush as well. Like Harris's efficiency is not going to be good. It's going to be reliant upon how much of a role he'll play in the receiving game. And we've seen Kenny Pickett develop as a player that's been a little bit better downfield so far in the preseason and training camp. And if that's the case, Harris is going to be a tough start this week. 22 is James Cook, player I've been high on all preseason. Got a tough matchup against the Jets, who are 8th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Last year, they were also 13th in EPA per rush and the 6th best run defense from PFF. So tough matchup for Cook, but I love this offense and I love what his role is going to be in it as a 3-down guy that definitely has the chance to post a ton of receptions week in and week out. So for me, it makes him a tough sit. That's why, in my mind, even in a tough matchup, he's still a back-end RB2 for me. So I definitely still like him. My RB23 this week is Raheem Mostert. I'm really high on this matchup here. If he was on your wire or anything like that, snatch him up. And if you're still drafting this week, make sure you get him in like I would say the 8th or so round, because you have an opportunity here in week 1 where he's an immediate start for me. The Chargers, 27th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season, 30th in EPA per rush last season, and you look at the team and they haven't changed a single thing. Other than Eric Kendricks, their front seven is completely unchanged, specifically as well in the middle of the field where they're a little bit banged up heading into the year 2. There's no difference here for, I think, the Packers and the Chargers when it comes to how they defend the run. So a prime opportunity for you. Closing out at the top 24 is Brian Robinson. The Cardinals going to be the worst team in football, I think, pretty soundly. From what things are looking like. 30th in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs last season, but they weren't terrible against the run, 18th in EPA. So this is more just a team that was bad, that teams ran the ball on them quite a bit. And Robinson's their kind of go-to guy when you're looking at between the tackles, scoring touchdowns. When this team's scoring points, Robinson will probably be a beneficiary. So I definitely think he's a playable asset for you this week. 25 is Rashad White. The Vikings last year were a serviceable run defense. They were still pretty solid. Second in run defense grade, 17th in EPA, 20th in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs. I think the defense got worse. You look at the loss of Darius Smith, lost Alvin Tomlinson. So front four isn't quite as good. They lose Kendricks as well. This team might be a fair bit worse against the run, but I do like the Vikings in this game, and Rashad White as a runner has not been very efficient. I'm pretty low on Rashad White. I probably will be most of the season unless I see something over the first 4 weeks that really makes me change my mind. So he'll consistently be in this probably area for me. This is kind of a meh matchup. 26 is Breece Hall. The Jets have the Bills. I love Breece Hall's talent. There's no way I'm trusting him this week because I just am not sold on him having an all-encompassing role in week 1. I'd be surprised if that's the case. And you get a Bills team, top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year, 7th in EPA. This was a good unit against the run. I love Hall. I'm skeptical, though. This is something I have to wait and see. I'm willing to sit him to figure out what I have in him this week. At 27 is Damien Pierce, a tough matchup against this Ravens defense. I think you're more prone to seeing teams be able to throw the ball against the Ravens than run it on the Ravens, and Pierce has a matchup where this Ravens team is 6th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year, top 10 in EPA, top 10 as a run defense in grade from PFF. So it's a tough matchup. There's a lot for this team to figure out when it comes to the offense in week 1 and being under this rookie quarterback and being under a new coaching staff. So I'm a little bit skeptical in week 1, but I still think Pierce will be a floor guy that you can put in a flex spot if you need to. At 28 is Isaiah Pacheco. The Lions were brutal against the run last year, 32nd in EPA per rush. But they were more serviceable, middle of the road in fantasy points allowed to running backs. This role, I think, it's going to be shared between him and McKinnon. I need to see what their plans are for Pacheco when it comes to will he be involved in the receiving game, especially for me to be able to push him farther ahead. Unless you run into a really clear matchup with a team that really can't compete with them, then that's where I'd have Pacheco easily inside my top 24. At 29 is James Conner. If you saw the thumbnail, he's on the cover. I thought he's a person a lot of people are probably wondering what to do with. I'm pretty concerned. The Commanders have probably the best front four in all of football. They were 5th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year. This was a really, really good unit against the run and against running backs. He just couldn't run the ball on them. And for Conner, I think he's definitely going to play a role in the receiving game. Because we're looking at like a Josh Dobbs potentially starting, probably been checking the ball down to him. And if they get any points, it's more than likely going to be in the backs of him. But this is just one of those nightmare teams to have to play for running back. So I'm really skeptical doing it. And it's really for you. If you want to play him, you should be looking for safety as opposed to, if you're playing some players with some risk and you're looking for a guy to like give you a bit of a floor, like you can play Conner, but I don't see more than like in a half PPR league, 10, 12 fantasy points coming from him with this matchup. At 30, closing things out is David Montgomery. I mentioned the opportunity here for the Lions running backs, and the Chiefs weren't fantastic brutal defending the pass against running backs, mediocre against the run. So I still think Montgomery in a game that I think has a lot of points he could score in. So that's why I have him in my top 30 this week. Some other guys, there's 3 guys that are missing that I definitely still think are worthy playing. Antonio Gibson, Samaje Perine, and A.J. Dillon in that plus matchup. I don't think did I skip Javonte Williams or did I just completely leave him out of here? Oh, I did skip Javonte Williams. So that's 17. Yeah, I didn't even mention him. But Javonte and Samaje Perine are guys I like. The Raiders 26th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, and then 22nd in run defense grade in EPA. So I think this is a team that's going to run the ball a lot more than people think. I'm willing to buy in on that for week 1, and I expect it. So I'm comfortable playing either one of these guys. I think it's going to be relatively split with Javonte holding an edge on some touchdown opportunities, and as well, just overall volume will be a little bit more. Some guys I'm not willing to play. I don't want to play any Eagles backs this week. I still got to figure out what exactly this is. If I had to play any, it'd probably be Kenny Gainwell. When it comes to Jamal Williams, that Titans matchup is far too difficult for me. For a guy that's not very efficient down to down as it is, needs touchdowns. Dalvin Cook, I'm not taking the dive in on. He's just started practicing. I don't really think he will get a huge workload with this kind of learning the offense and getting in with this team. So those are some of the players that I'm looking to kind of keep on the bench this week that are kind of on the fringe, but I probably wouldn't play. All right, those are my top 30 running backs for week 1 of the fantasy football season. Again, if you want to ask specific start-sit questions at any position, be sure to join us on Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern on the Stunt. That's where we'll be doing things all season long. The link to download the Stunt is down below in the description for both Android and iOS. We will see you guys when we talk some wide receivers later this week. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you did enjoy today's video and it was valuable for you. We'll have tons more each and every week and be doing this each and every week of the season. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.